Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I would like to give you an updated tier list for Warhammer 40k competitive. It's been a while since the last tier list and we've had many changes and new additions to the game, including new codexes and a new big FAQ. So because of these changes and additions, the tier list does have some significant changes, so I figured it was time for an update. I will be making another updated video after Chapter Approved in a few months as well, because I feel like the points changes in Chapter Approved will be a much bigger factor in the tier of each army and will change the meta much more than the last FAQ did. With that said, I would like to mention that I think almost all factions in the game are viable and can possibly win events, but I do think some armies have a better chance of winning an event because they either have better rules, better stats, or better combos, and that's where the tier list comes in. So please don't be discouraged if you see that your army is in one of the lower tiers, because I still firmly believe it's the player who makes the army great and not the other way around. But if competitive is what you're aiming for and you want the best chance of winning an event, then I would always go with the armies that give you a best chance of winning. Warhammer 40k is a numbers game after all, and some armies have some better numbers than others. So how I base this tier list is off of the tournament results from my top 10 videos. So if you haven't had a chance to check out any of my top 10 videos, then I would check those out. They are a great way to see what's currently going on in the meta, so you can try to build your own list to counter or fit into the meta. My opinion is also a factor into these placings as well. I spend a lot of time studying Warhammer 40k and all of its armies, since it's pretty much my job at this point. So I feel I have a good understanding of the state of the game. So I feel like I'm very well versed in the armies and the game overall. So with my credentials out of the way and the explanation of how this tier list is formed, this video was sponsored by themagnetbaron.com. They offer magnets of all shapes and sizes, they offer magnetized movement trays, magnetized flight stands, and they even offer fully built and magnetized models, all for a great price. So if you were looking at picking up some magnets to make transportation of your bigger models easier, or even just to change the loadouts on your little guys, then I would check out themagnetbaron.com for all of your magnet needs. They are actually offering a 2-for-1 deal right now up until October 30th, so if you want some magnets, now is the time to get into it. A link for their website will be in the description. Now let's get into what you guys came here for, and that is the tier list post Big FAQ number 2. There are 4 different tiers altogether on this list, and the armies in each tier are in no particular order because I feel the armies in each tier are very close to each other, so it's not really needed. Let's start from the bottom tier and move up to the top tier. Tier 4, or garbage tier. Sorry for calling these armies garbage, but I don't really want to sugarcoat it since that's not really my style. These armies are the weakest in the game by far. Grey Knights because they are all overpriced for what they offer, and because every high tier army and even mid tier armies in the game have easy ways to deal with them. You can combine them with Imperial Guard to make them a little better, but at that point I think it would be more optimal to just play Imperial Guard by themselves. And if you wanted an elite army that does well, then Custodes would be a much better option. And for Genestealers, I actually should have had these guys at tier 3 or tier 2 in the last video because I originally underestimated how good their infiltrating was and their psychic spells. But after the last big FAQ, their infiltrating is basically useless now, which was the main thing the army had going for them. They also don't have a codex, so they don't have as many options for strategies or stratagems as other armies do. But I can almost guarantee that when they do get their own codex in the next few months, they will go up at least a tier or 2, leaving Grey Knights to be the only garbage tier army in the game, unless Grey Knights get some significant changes in the next chapter approved. Tier 3, or the low tier. These armies aren't very optimal when it comes to competitive play, since other armies in the tiers above this one have much better options to accomplish the same goals. Orks are okay, and I've even won a few tournaments or have done well at a few events, but without their codex they are still the number 2 horde army behind Tyranids, who are placed higher on the list. Like the Genestealer cult though, once Orks get their own codex, I'm willing to bet they jump up to tier 2 or possibly even tier 1 and will start doing well in the competitive meta, since they do have some decent units, they just need some decent rules and stratagems to go with them. Dark Angels are okay as well, and could possibly be tier 2, but I felt tier 3 was more appropriate since every other Imperial chapter seems to have better options, except for a few of the chapters in the vanilla Space Marine Codex. If there was a tier 2.5, then I think Dark Angels would fit there, but I didn't feel like overcomplicating the tier list with half tiers. And Necrons have been in a bad spot for a long time as well. They aren't so bad that I would put them in the garbage tier, but they aren't good enough in my opinion to be tier 2. I originally had them at tier 2 in the last tier list mainly because of Tesseract Vault spam, but with the changes to the meta, I don't think Vaults are even that good anymore. I think a Vault list could still handle its own against most tier 2 armies and lower, but against some of the tier 2 lists and all of the tier 1 lists, I feel like Vaults aren't that great. I hope Necrons get some good changes with the next chapter approved, otherwise they're going to remain in the low tier for a while. Tier 2, or the Gatekeepers tier. I call it the Gatekeeper tier because if your list can beat these armies, then you probably have a competitive list, meaning these armies are the gatekeepers into competitive play. As you can see, this tier has a ton of armies, more armies than any other tier in the game. And this is why I feel like 8th edition is pretty balanced, since I feel like most armies in the game are above the low tier and around the same strength as each other. A decent amount of these armies have even been featured in the top 10s, meaning they've placed either 3rd, 2nd, or 1st at large events, proving that these armies can still handle the tier 1 armies as well, as long as the person piloting them is a skilled general. You can also see that there are a few changes from the last tier list I made. I feel Custodes are now tier 2 instead of tier 1, because the armies in tier 1 all have good options for taking out Custodes now, so that alone dropped them down to tier 2. If there was a tier in between 2 and 1, then I would probably put Custodes there, but again, I don't want to overcomplicate the tier list with half tiers. Space Wolves went from the garbage tier to tier 2, mainly because of the release of their codex. They have some really cool combos like the Rune Priest with a boatload of attacks, although in my opinion he's not super reliable. Thunderhammer characters that can hit on 2+ because of their chapter trait, 2+ saves on their units from a spell that can also become -1 to hit with a stratagem. All of these things are great for competitive play, and I feel like it puts Space Wolves comfortably at tier 2. Deathwatch has also moved up to tier 2 because I feel like they have some good versatility in how they can be used, with being able to mix models from different units, and also their special ammunition. To be honest, I still kind of feel like they are tier 3 or in between tier 3 and tier 2, but I think they lean a bit towards tier 2, so that's why I decided to place them here. Demons are now in tier 2, and to be honest, probably should have been here in the first tier list as well. They have a ton of great units and combos, like the Bloodletter Bomb, or the Pink Horror Bombs, or even Nurglings with their great area denial, or Plague Bearers with being the most resilient screening units in the game. Their Demon Princes are also really strong, especially the Corn Demon Princes. Overall, I think they definitely deserve a spot at tier 2, but just not good enough to be tier 1. Imperial Knights moved from tier 3 to tier 2 because of their codex. They have access to some really strong stratagems, and when combined with Guard can make some really strong combos because of the command point funding. But even as a solo army, Knights are great because they are almost an anti-meta army. Most meta lists in the game come with more anti-infantry than anti-tank to be able to reliably deal with stuff like Tyranids, which means those armies usually don't have the proper tools to deal with a full Knight list efficiently, which effectively makes the Knight list an anti-meta army. With that said though, more people are adding more anti-tank units to their list to combat Knights, but even then, if the Knights get lucky with their invul saves, they can still deal a stupid amount of damage. And the Castellan is by far one of the most cost-efficient units in the game when you provide him with a ton of command points to fund his stratagems. You can buff him with the Iron Bulwark, which gives him a natural 4+ invul save that can then go up to a 3+ invul save with rotating ion shields. Overall, I think Knights are extremely close to hitting tier 1 status, but in my opinion, I think they are high tier 2. Sisters of Battle went up a tier as well, even without a codex. They are the best army in the game that does not have a codex right now. Again, I probably should have had the Sisters in tier 2 originally in the first tier list, but admittedly, it was because of a lack of experience against them that I put them lower than I now feel they should be. They are one of the rarer armies in the game, if not the rarest army in the game to see on tabletop, because most of their models are metal and expensive, so I never had a chance to actually see them played until recently. With that said though, Axe of Faith is insanely strong and offers a lot of versatility in how you can play them. So much so that it doesn't really matter that they don't have many stratagems or relics to use. I think the army will only get stronger when their codex is released next year, so I see nothing but good things for Sisters, and probably an influx of them at events when they finally get plastic models. Other than those armies, everything else in tier 2 seems to be the same, so I won't talk too much about them. I will say though, for Blood Angels, I still think they are tier 2. I've seen a lot of complaints from Blood Angels players though about the new FAQ and how the fly keyword no longer works in the charge phase. Personally, I don't think this is that big of a deal to them. Sure, it does affect them in some ways, but they're still really good because if you bring a gun line like Astra Militarum Allies or even just some Blood Angels Intercessors or something like that, you can shoot down the screen first before you go to charge. So that way you don't really need the fly keyword in the charge phase anyways. So now let's talk about the tier 1 armies, which are the top tier armies. This tier pretty much remains the exact same as it was before, with a couple new additions, although some of the armies did lose a bit of their strength. For example, Drukhari's best stratagem is now 4 command points instead of 3 command points, meaning you can really only get it off once or twice a game, but at the expense of not having enough command points for stuff like lightning fast reflexes, among other useful stratagems. Also, with the change that they made to command point regeneration, you can only regain 1 command point per battle round now, so even if you take the Warlord trait for Cabal the Blackheart to roll dice to get command points back, you can only get 1 back no matter what for that battle round. So this hurts them as well because they're no longer going to be able to keep funding the 3 command point Vect, because now it's 4 command points and you're not going to get nearly as many command points back. Also, if the Drukhari player opts to hide Ravagers in Deep Strike now with the stratagem, they can't bring those units in until turn 2, which might give the opponent enough time to whittle down the Drukhari force that's on the board and mitigate enough damage to stay in the game comfortably. This means if the Drukhari player wants to continue with the Alpha Strike style that works so well for them, then they need to start the Ravagers on the board. And without a natural -1 to hit, the Ravagers can be blown up fairly easily if they aren't lucky enough to make their invul saves, or if they aren't hidden very well. Craftworlds and Inari received an indirect nerf as well with how the fly keyword works in the charge phase now, which is that it doesn't work in the charge phase now, like I mentioned when talking about Blood Angels. So having those Shining Spears charge over a screen is impossible now. With that said though, believe it or not, Shining Spears are actually a shooting unit more than they are a charging unit, and will still most likely annihilate the screen with being able to shoot twice with the spell Word of the Phoenix, and then use Soul Burst to return to safety. So yes, they were nerfed in a way, but personally I feel like they are still going to be one of the strongest armies in the game. Tau and Astra Militarum made out like bandits though with this new FAQ, because since you can't charge over the screen anymore with the fly keyword, they have an easier time screening for their better units, which is something they suffered from. And although this is a minor change, it is a minor buff to them. So with these changes, these armies still remain in the top tier comfortably. And sure, Astra Militarum did take a big hit with their command point battery, but to be honest, when Astra Militarum is played by themselves anyways, they honestly don't really need that many command points to be effective. So it's not as big of a nerf to Astra Militarum as it is to using Astra Militarum as allies for the command point battery. And then we have some new additions to the top tier, and that would be Thousand Suns and Death Guard. Thousand Suns are here because smite spam is a thing, since Thousand Suns ignore the penalties for smiting. So against a good amount of armies, they are actually very strong. Combine that with the fact that they can bring some Demon Princes that are very good in close combat while also smiting stuff on their way to close combat. They can also bring Zangors, which are amazing at clearing out screens so your smites can hit better targets, and also combine them with some demons for even more shenanigans. They also have some amazing spells that aren't smite, like Treason of Tzeentch, which can target an enemy character and basically makes that character your unit for that turn. Use this to target an enemy Castellan, and then use that Castellan to blow up a bunch of your opponent's stuff with their own unit, and watch your opponent become the saltiest being on the planet. It's pretty difficult to pull this off though, since you need to roll higher than the character's leadership on 2 dice, so you need to roll a 10 plus on 2 dice, but if it does go off, it will net you a huge advantage that might lead to winning the game. And for Death Guard, they are stupidly resilient while packing a decent punch. They have a bunch of really good models that are great for competitive play. Most of the demon vehicles they use are very strong and disgustingly resilient. Their Primarch hits like a truck and is also pretty hard to take down if you get the -1 to hit spell off on them. And the Blightlord Terminators are immovable bricks that can sandwich the opponent through Deep Strike and then force the opponent to run into your main force or be crushed between a rock and a hard place. I was hesitant to put Death Guard at tier 1, but to be honest, they should probably be high tier 2, but I think there are enough builds for them that allow them to consistently place well at large events, so I felt tier 1 was more appropriate for them. And that about covers it for this tier list. Remember that this list might only be relevant for a few months until Chapter Approved is released, but when Chapter Approved is released, I will make another updated tier list for you guys. Hopefully this list helps you determine where the armies fit into the meta and the overall strength of each army. Also, the beauty of 8th edition is how we can mix and match armies. So if you love your low tier army but really want to compete with it, then consider allying in some of the higher tier armies to help boost your army competitively. The only army you can't really do this with that is low tier is Necrons, but other than them, pretty much every other low tier army can be boosted through allies. Also, if you need help figuring out how to make a strong list, I can help you with that through Patreon. I offer a list building and critiquing service where I can help build you a list and give you some pointers on how to pilot it. This service is through Patreon and is only $5, which is pretty inexpensive, but gives you so much to work with. It also includes access to a community of over 100 people to talk to in the Almost Pro Gaming Discord channel, where they can also give you advice on the game. There is even a channel in the Discord that is dedicated to showing off your painting and modeling, so if you're into the hobby for that, we also have some great painters in the Discord that would love to give you tips on how to paint better as well. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, then check me out on Patreon, because all of this is offered in the $5 option, which again is very inexpensive for how much it offers. I do appreciate all of my patrons, since they are the ones that keep the channel going. Without their support, the channel would not be where it's at today. So thank you to all my patrons, I love you all. Anyways, thanks for watching the video and I hope you enjoyed it. Check out some of my other content if you're interested in competitive Warhammer, or even if you just want to learn to play your casual games a bit more strategically. Also, don't forget to check out the Patreon if you're interested in the Almost Pro Gaming Discord channel, basic coaching, or even advanced coaching. Thanks again for watching the video, I hope you enjoyed it, and happy wargaming.